Thank you for joining me. I'm Nola Simon. I'm the host of the Hybrid Remote Center of Excellence, and this is a podcast about malicious compliance. So, recently there have been lots of articles floating around about coffee badging, and what coffee badging is. People really don't actually appreciate the mandates to come back into the office, and so they're complying by coming in, swiping in, having a coffee, maybe taking a meeting, have some lunch, and then they leave. And technically, this is compliance with the mandate because they do enter the building, they do see some people, and then they leave. My problem with coffee badging, because I've come across a few people who are calling it a genius hack, my problem is this is an example of a policy that people feel unfair, so they're not honoring the spirit of what the policy is supposed to represent. The return to office mandate, for example, is designed to have people come back and do their full workday in the office, whatever that looks like for the organization, whether it's 1 day a week, 2 days a week, whatever it is. And it's people who feel that they can check the box and feel safe enough that nobody's going to say anything to them, that they're actually going to comply, but they're doing it in such a way that it doesn't honor the spirit of what the policy is. Another way to phrase that is called deviant conformity. So you're conforming, but you're not doing so in a way that management intends you to do it. And honestly, it's indicative of a policy that's badly designed, that people fundamentally don't agree with, and they're looking for ways to make you happy enough and not get into trouble, but still really get what it is they want. And there are layers of it. So, for example, I would classify this more as deviant conformity. If you had the choice of which days you could come in, like I did, I used to choose Monday and Tuesday. So there's specific reasons I chose Monday and Tuesday. For one, Mondays worked better for me personally. And Tuesdays, there were always, if there were big team meetings, they were always held on Tuesdays. So I could attend more team meetings in person on Tuesdays, and that actually worked better because I found that it improved visibility. I could advocate for support for remote people better actually in the office. There were a variety of reasons, but I have to tell you there's also another reason. If you look at how many stat holidays there are and what days those stat holidays fall on, technically they fall on Mondays mostly. Not all of them. Some of them you do get the occasional Friday. And then you get a long weekend and you get fewer days that you actually have to go into the office. So again, this is deviant conformity. You're complying with the rule, but you're doing so in such a way that benefits you in the long term, right? I would say coffee badging is more malicious than it is deviant because you have to have a certain amount of psychological safety to really walk into that office and then just leave a few hours later knowing that's not what is intended. And honestly, it could be that you feel you have a certain power and influence where you are in the hierarchy. You're a director, you're a VP, whatever you are. You feel that you've got sufficient power and influence and nobody's really going to say anything to you. Or it could be that you feel comfortable enough in the relationships that you formed that you can get away with it and nobody's really going to punish you or hold you accountable for not working in the way that everyone else is required to work. Because to be quite honest, not everybody is going to feel safe enough. Anybody who's not the majority, who already is dealing with microaggressions, who's already dealing with being held to a higher standard because of who they are and what their background is, if they experience any kind of experience in the workplace that makes them uncomfortable and less confident, they're not going to try this coffee badging. So there's a lot of privilege that comes with blatantly really disregarding what that rule is designed to do. And somebody had asked me the other day why I feel it gets under my skin, to be quite honest, because at the end of the day, you should be designing policy that's going to work for the majority and have very few exceptions. That's the indicator of a really well-designed policy. Can the majority of people deal with it? Does it have enough flexibility to honor what most people need from it, what the organization needs from it, and then you might have to make a few exceptions for some edge cases that don't exactly fit for whatever reason. And so when people just blatantly disregard and do whatever they feel that they want, and there's no accountability for that, no leader, no manager holds them accountable for behaving in a way that the majority is not allowed to, then I have an issue with that, because I come from a background where I was not the norm. I was the person who was held accountable for everything. I was the person who I didn't have that flexibility to really just say, I feel safe enough just to disregard your rules. So it gets under my skin because I think that it's not inclusive. I think that you're not honoring your coworkers. I think you're disrespecting your leadership when you do that. And to be quite honest, you have to remember that a lot of the leaders and the managers aren't really big fans of the office either. They also want that flexibility. So they're in a situation where they're actually asked to enforce policies that they don't necessarily believe in. And you choosing coffee badging or whatever other example you have of malicious compliance, you're making their job harder, because all of a sudden you've introduced inequity and bias into the equation. Because, like in my experience, my direct manager had very little influence over the people who felt entitled to do this, because their relationships are so far up the chain that she felt powerless. And that's problematic, right? Because you're impacting the team, you're impacting the authority of the manager, you're setting precedent that can then be used to disregard other policies. And it's honestly indicative of a culture that is tolerating, it's almost like the brilliant jerk phenomenon. You've got somebody who performs at a level you're afraid to deal with them. You don't want to piss them off, you don't want to make them angry, but at the same time, they're not treating people well. That's really how it gets under my skin. And again, this becomes an issue of inconsistent application of policy. And it undermines the organization, it undermines the culture, and it's creating a two-level culture where you've got these people, and again, I've seen various studies that honestly say that it's mostly men who try to coffee badge. And I don't know that's true. It's just the studies that I've seen. And women don't feel safe enough to do that. And if you look at the dominant culture and you look at who is in management and leadership, that's logical. So that is how it gets under my skin, and that's why I felt the need to really talk about that, because to me it's a red flag for your culture. And it really tells me that you've got policies that people feel are unfair, and it erodes trust, because some people feel they can get away with it, some people feel that they can't, and the people who don't feel that they can get away with disregarding the policies, they don't trust the leadership and the management to be able to handle those people who are abusing the policy. And honestly, I do feel it's a form of policy abuse. And as I said, there are levels of that. It's not necessarily always as extreme as coffee badging and just walking out a few hours later. And yes, they're still doing their jobs, but I really don't agree that it's not a performance issue, because if companies are going to surveil, which companies are surveilling, They're monitoring what your status is in Slack and online collaboration sessions. And if you're commuting any length of distance, your availability is going to be impacted. So again, it comes down to the surveillance. If you're surveilling all of the people that are in your company and you're letting some people slide on that, it's a whole trust issue. It's a whole trust issue, right? And that fundamentally is not good for relationships. It's not good for trust, and it's not good for it undermines the leadership. So that's really what I wanted to say. If you're noticing malicious compliance or deviant conformity, whatnot, start to monitor it. Start to see who actually feels safe enough to do it, because that's also going to be where you feel you might actually have your diversity, equity, and inclusion, your belonging issues. The people who feel safe enough to disregard policies that they feel are unfair, those probably are the people who feel that they have elevated status within your company. So why do those people feel safer than the others? And that really could be something that you use, if it's happening, to fuel other initiatives that you want to take. And the other question is, how do you actually deal with people who are doing this? And honestly, it comes down to being very clear and having those conversations with people when you notice that they're doing it, right? So it's like stating the policy, holding them accountable, indicating that you expect behavior change, and documenting, because it's a pattern of behavior that is about trust, it's about respect, and it's really all related to psychological safety. So if you're going to change that and stop malicious compliance, you need to have those difficult conversations. And those could be very difficult conversations because, as I suspect, and from what the studies that I'd seen, it may be that it's the dominant culture that really is setting the precedent for these people to feel that they can disregard the policies. Not an easy situation to deal with, especially if you feel that you don't have the power and influence with your upper leadership to be able to address that. And again, fundamentally, it comes back to the fact that the policies are not felt to be fair. So it's complicated. Anyways, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this situation. I wanted to talk about it in a longer form way because I do find that it is very nuanced. Thank you so much for listening.